The battlefield was silent, a vast expanse of smoldering debris stretching as far as the eye could see. The air was thick with ash and the acrid stench of burning metal, a suffocating reminder of the carnage that had unfolded just hours earlier. In the eerie stillness, a lone figure moved cautiously through the wreckage, its form partially obscured by the swirling dust. General Krythak of the Zarathian Dominion had witnessed countless wars across the galaxy, but nothing had prepared him for this. His once pristine armor was battered and scorched, the sigil of his empire barely visible beneath the layers of grime. His every step was measured, his every breath labored. He was searching for survivors, for answers, for some shred of logic to explain how everything had gone so disastrously wrong. The humans were supposed to be an easy conquest. Their technology was primitive, their tactics unrefined. When the Dominion's fleet had arrived in Earth's orbit, it had been with the confidence of a predator stalking its prey. The plan was simple: overwhelm them with superior firepower, crush their resistance, and claim their planet as a resource hub for the Empire. But as Krythak surveyed the ruins of his forces, he couldn't ignore the bitter truth: the humans had won. His comm unit crackled weakly, a garbled signal cutting through the oppressive silence. Krythak tapped it, his claws clinking against the damaged device. "This is General Krythak," he said, his voice hoarse. "Any remaining units, report your status." Static was his only response. Krythak clenched his jaw, the weight of his failure pressing down on him like a physical force. The Dominion's fleet, once the pride of their empire, had been reduced to ash and scrap. Thousands of soldiers and war machines lay scattered across the battlefield, their might rendered meaningless. A sudden noise shattered the silence, a faint, rhythmic clanging that echoed through the wreckage. Krythak froze, his senses on high alert. He reached for his sidearm, the weapon's familiar weight offering a shred of reassurance. He followed the sound, his movements cautious yet deliberate. As he rounded a twisted hulk of metal that had once been a command transport, he saw them, a group of humans, their silhouettes illuminated by the flickering flames that dotted the battlefield. They were scavenging, their movements efficient and purposeful. One of them, a woman with a fierce intensity in her eyes, wielded a welding torch, her hands steady as she worked on a piece of alien machinery. Krythak's grip on his weapon tightened, his mind racing. He could take them out now, eliminate the remnants of the enemy that had brought his forces to their knees. But something stopped him, a flicker of curiosity, of disbelief. These were the victors, these ragged, bloodied survivors? He lowered his weapon, his claws trembling. For the first time in his long and storied career, Krythak felt a pang of doubt. He had underestimated them once before. He would not make the same mistake again. From his vantage point, Krythak observed the humans in silence. They moved with a resilience that was almost unnerving, their battered forms belying the strength of their resolve. They were not celebrating their victory, nor were they mourning their losses. They were working, repairing, salvaging, rebuilding. It was as if they had already moved on from the horrors of the battle, their focus squarely on what came next. The woman with the welding torch paused, her gaze sweeping across the wreckage. For a brief moment, her eyes met Krythak's, and his breath caught in his throat. She didn't look afraid or angry. She looked determined. Before he could react, she turned back to her work, her movements unbroken. Krythak stepped back into the shadows, his mind a whirlwind of questions. How had they done it? How had these humans, so seemingly fragile and disorganized, managed to defeat the might of the Dominion? The answer eluded him, but one thing was clear: this was no ordinary enemy. They were not the weak, divided species he had believed them to be. They were something else entirely, something far more dangerous. As Krythak retreated into the dust and shadows, a single thought burned in his mind: the humans had won, and the Dominion would never be the same. Krythak retreated to the remnants of his command post, a shattered husk of a building that had once been a symbol of the Dominion's dominance. Now it was a graveyard, the walls scorched and the corridors littered with the bodies of his soldiers. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of weakened metal. He activated his personal log device, its flickering screen a stark contrast to the darkness surrounding him. This was protocol, to record the events leading up to the battle's outcome, to analyze what had gone wrong. But as he stared at the device, his claws hovering over the controls, he hesitated. What could he possibly say? That the humans had outwitted them? That they had fought with a tenacity that defied all logic? That The Dominion, for all its technological superiority, had underestimated the power of a species driven to the brink. Krythak began to speak, his voice low and measured. "This is General Krythak of the Zorathian Dominion. Date: post-invasion cycle 38. Status: catastrophic failure." He paused, his throat tightening. "The humans, they were not what we expected. Their technology is primitive by our standards, but their ingenuity, their adaptability, it is unparalleled. They used our own weapons against us, repurposed our machines, turned the battlefield into a maze of traps. Every advantage we thought we had, they nullified, and their will to survive. It is unlike anything I have ever encountered." He stopped the recording, his mind racing. This wasn't just a failure of tactics or resources. It was a failure of understanding. The Dominion had viewed the humans as inferior, dismissing their potential as a threat. That arrogance had cost them everything. As Krythak sat in the ruins of his command post, his comm unit crackled to life. The signal was faint, but it was there. He scrambled to adjust the settings, his heart pounding. "This is Krythak," he said, his voice sharp. "Identify yourself." The response came through in broken fragments, but it was enough to spark a glimmer of hope. "General, survivors, coordinates, retreat point." Krythak input the coordinates into his wrist display, his claws trembling. There were others out there, remnants of his forces who had managed to evade capture or death. If he could reach them, if he could regroup, there might still be a chance to salvage something from this disaster. The journey to the retreat point was treacherous, the landscape a labyrinth of debris and danger. Krythak moved carefully, his senses on high alert. The humans were everywhere, their scavenging teams working tirelessly to recover anything of value. He avoided them, his movements silent and precise. When he finally reached the coordinates, he found a small group of Zorathian soldiers huddled in a makeshift shelter. Their armor was battered, their faces hollow with exhaustion. But when they saw Krythak, they straightened, their postures stiffening with a mix of relief and shame. "General," one of them said, his voice trembling. We thought you were lost." Krythak nodded, his gaze sweeping over the group. "We are all that remains," he said, his tone grave. "But we are not finished. The humans may have won this battle, but the war is not over. We will learn from this. We will adapt, and we will return." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions betraying their doubts. Krythak understood their hesitation. The Dominion's invincibility had been shattered, their pride reduced to ashes. But he refused to give in to despair. There was still a path forward, even if it was fraught with uncertainty. As the soldiers began to regroup and assess their resources, Krythak found himself staring out at the horizon. The ruins of Earth's cities loomed in the distance, a haunting reminder of the devastation wrought by the invasion. And yet, amidst the wreckage, life continued. The humans were rebuilding, their resilience a testament to their strength. Krythak clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. The humans had won this time, but they would not be underestimated again. The Dominion would rise from the ashes, stronger and more prepared. And when the dust settled, it would be the humans who marveled at their own defeat. But as he turned back to his soldiers, a sliver of doubt crept into his mind. Could the Dominion truly overcome a species that thrived in adversity, that turned every setback into an opportunity? Could they win against an enemy that refused to break? Krythak pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. There was work to be done, and the future of the Dominion depended on it. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that the humans were more than just a foe to be conquered. They were a force of nature, and Krythak wasn't sure if even the might of the Dominion could stand against them. Weeks turned into months as Krythak and his remnants worked to survive in the shadows of a world they had once sought to dominate. They scavenged what they could, their advanced technology now reduced to scraps and improvisation. Every day was a battle, not against the humans, but against the harsh realities of survival. It was during one such scavenging mission that Krythak encountered something he hadn't expected: a human child. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 Earth cycles old, his clothes tattered and his face smeared with dirt. He was alone, crouched in the wreckage of what had once been a marketplace, his small hands rummaging through a pile of debris. When Krythak approached, the child froze, his wide eyes filled with terror. Krythak hesitated, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the boy. This was not a soldier, not an enemy. This was a child, innocent, vulnerable, and utterly powerless. For a moment, Krythak was paralyzed, asked, torn between his instincts as a warrior and the strange, unfamiliar pang of empathy that tugged at his chest. The boy made a sudden move, grabbing a jagged piece of metal and brandishing it like a weapon. His hands trembled, but his gaze was fierce. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice high-pitched but resolute. Krythak lowered his weapon slowly, his movements deliberate. "I mean you no harm," he said, his voice low and even. The words felt foreign on his tongue, but they came from a place of truth. The boy didn't lower his makeshift weapon, but he didn't run, either. Krythak crouched down to make himself less imposing, his glowing eyes meeting the boy's. "You are alone," he said. "Why? Where are your people?" The boy's lip quivered, and for a moment, his fierce facade cracked. "They're gone," he whispered. "The fighting, they didn't make it." Krythak felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. He had seen countless worlds reduced to rubble, had watched entire species bow before the might of the Dominion. But in that moment, staring into the tear-streaked face of a human child, he felt the weight of every life lost. Without thinking, Krythak reached into the pouch at his side and pulled out a ration pack. He placed it on the ground between them, then stepped back. "Eat," he said. "You need your strength." The boy hesitated, his eyes darting between Krythak and the ration pack. Slowly, cautiously, he edged forward and snatched it up. He tore into it with a desperation that spoke volumes, devouring the contents as if it were the first food he'd had in days. Krythak watched in silence, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. This child was a symbol of everything the Dominion had sought to destroy: humanity's resilience, its will to survive. And yet, in this moment, Krythak couldn't see him as an enemy. He was just a boy, clinging to life in a world turned to ash. When the boy finished eating, he looked up at Krythak, his expression wary but less hostile. "Why did you help me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Krythak didn't have an answer, or perhaps the answer was too complex to put into words. "Because I could," he said finally. The encounter stayed with Krythak as he returned to his camp. He didn't tell his soldiers about the boy, didn't share the strange sense of connection he had felt. But the memory lingered, a thorn in his mind that refused to be ignored. In the weeks that followed, Krythak began to see the humans in a new light. He watched them from the shadows, observed their resilience, their ingenuity, their ability to adapt and overcome. They were not the weak, disorganized creatures he had once believed them to be. They were something far greater, something the Dominion had underestimated at its peril. It was this realization that led Krythak to make a choice that would change everything. One night, as his soldiers slept, Krythak activated his comm unit and transmitted a signal to the humans. It was a risk, one that could cost him everything. But he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The Dominion had lost, and the only path forward was one of surrender. When the humans responded, their tone was cautious but curious. A meeting was arranged, a neutral ground where Krythak and a delegation of humans would come face to face for the first time since the battle. The meeting took place in the ruins of a city square, the setting a haunting reminder of the war's devastation. Krythak stood tall, his armor battered but his resolve unbroken. Across from him was the human delegation, led by the woman he had seen on the battlefield, the one with the welding torch and the fierce determination in her eyes. "General Krythak," she said, her voice steady but guarded. "You requested this meeting. What do you want?" Krythak met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "An end," he said, "to this war, to this cycle of destruction. I seek a truce." The humans exchanged glances, their faces a mix of surprise and suspicion. The woman, their leader, studied Krythak closely, her eyes searching for any sign of deceit. "Why now?" she asked. "Why not before you brought your fleet to our skies?" Krythak's jaw tightened. "Because I was blind," he said. "I saw your people as nothing more than an obstacle to be crushed. But I was wrong. You are more than that. You are formidable." The woman's lips quirked in a faint, humorless smile. "That's one word for it," she said. The negotiations that followed were tense, each side wary of the other's intentions. But as the hours turned into days, a fragile understanding began to take shape. Krythak spoke of the Dominion's mistakes, its arrogance and hubris. The humans shared their stories of loss and survival, their determination to protect what remained of their world. In the end, it was not trust that brought them together, but necessity. Both sides had seen enough death, enough destruction. They were tired of fighting, tired of losing. And so, in the ruins of a world they had both scarred, they chose a different path. path of hope. The truce between the humans and the remnants of the Zorathian dominion was fragile, held together by mutual exhaustion and the hope for something better. At first, their interactions were awkward and tense, each side struggling to reconcile years of hatred with the tentative steps toward cooperation. But necessity has a way of bridging divides, and as the days turned to weeks, they began to find common ground. The first breakthrough came when Krythak and the human leader, who introduced herself as Commander Elena Ward, agreed to establish a joint task force. Their mission was twofold: to rebuild the devastated planet and to dismantle the remnants of the Dominion's war machinery that still posed a threat. The effort required trust, collaboration, and a level of transparency that neither side was entirely comfortable with. Yet, as the task force began its work, something remarkable happened. Humans and Zorathians, former enemies who had once faced each other across the battlefield, found themselves working side by side. Language barriers were overcome with translators, cultural differences bridged through shared experiences. They built shelters, cleared rubble, and distributed resources, their combined efforts breathing life into a world that had been on the brink of collapse. For Krythak, the process was both humbling and enlightening. He spent hours in the field, his once gleaming armor now scuffed and dented from manual labor. He worked alongside human engineers, their ingenuity and resourcefulness never ceasing to amaze him. They could take the most damaged, seemingly useless piece of machinery and repurpose it into something functional. It was a skill born of necessity, a testament to their resilience. One evening, as the sun set over the ruins of a city they were rebuilding, Krythak found himself sitting beside Elena. The two leaders had formed an unlikely camaraderie, their shared responsibilities forging a bond of mutual respect. "You humans are a paradox," Krythak said, his voice contemplative. "You are fragile yet unyielding, divided yet united when it matters most. I do not understand how you function." Elena chuckled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "We're messy, that's for sure," she said, "but we've always been good at rising to a challenge. Maybe it's because we've had to fight for everything we have." Krythak nodded slowly, her words resonating with him. "It is a strength," he said, "one that we underestimated." Elena turned to him, her expression softening. "And you? What made you change? Why did you decide to stop fighting?" Krythak hesitated, the question stirring something deep within him. "I saw your people," he said finally, "not as enemies, but as individuals. I saw your strength, your determination, and I saw a child, alone, starving, but unbroken. It reminded me of what we fight for, not conquest, but survival." Elena studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I think that's something we can agree on," she said. As the task force continued its work, the bonds between the two species grew stronger. Former soldiers shared stories of their experiences, finding commonalities in their struggles. Scientists collaborated on projects that blended human ingenuity with Zorathian technology, creating innovations that would benefit both their peoples. One of the most profound moments came when a group of human and Zorathian children gathered to plant trees in a memorial garden. The sight of them working together, their laughter ringing through the air, was a powerful symbol of the hope that had emerged from the ashes of war. Years later, the garden stood as a testament to what had been achieved. The trees, a mix of earth and Zorathian flora, flourished side by side, their roots intertwined. At the garden's center was a monument, a sculpture of two figures, one human and one Zorathian, standing together with their hands clasped. The inscription read, "In unity we found strength. In hope we found peace." Krythak, now an elder statesman of the accord that had been formed between their peoples, often visited the garden. He would sit beneath the trees and reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. The war had been a tragedy, a scar that would never fully heal, but it had also been a catalyst for change, a turning point that had reshaped their worlds. One day, as he sat in the garden, he was approached by a young Zorathian diplomat. "General Krythak," the diplomat said, his voice filled with reverence, "your actions helped pave the way for everything we have achieved. What advice would you give to those who will follow in your footsteps?" Krythak looked up at the young diplomat, his expression thoughtful. "Remember that strength is not found in domination," he said. "It is found in understanding, in seeing your enemy not as an adversary, but as a being with hopes and fears like your own. That is the lesson we must carry forward." The diplomat nodded, his eyes shining with determination. "I will remember," he said. As the diplomat left, Krythak turned his gaze back to the garden. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the trees. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace, a peace born not from victory, but from reconciliation. And somewhere, in the vast expanse of the galaxy, the story of Earth and the Dominion continued to inspire those who heard it. It was a story of resilience, of mercy, and of the power of unity. A story that reminded all who listened that even in the darkest times, hope could prevail. As the stars began to emerge in the night sky, their light seemed to echo the message that had come to define their journey. In the dust of our greatest struggles, we found the seeds of a brighter future. Decades passed, and the story of the truce between Earth and the Dominion became the foundation of a new era of interstellar cooperation. The Accord, initially a fragile alliance born of necessity, had grown into a thriving coalition that encompassed dozens of worlds and species. It was a beacon of hope, a testament to what could be achieved when former enemies chose to stand together. The transformation of Earth was nothing short of extraordinary. Cities that had once been rubble were now hubs of innovation, their skylines a blend of human and Zorathian architecture. The scars of war were still visible in some places, preserved as reminders of the price of conflict. But the world had moved forward, driven by a collective determination to build a better future. One of the most ambitious projects undertaken by the Accord was the creation of the Stellar Nexus, a vast space station that served as both a diplomatic hub and a center for scientific exploration. Located in neutral space, the Nexus was a symbol of unity, its corridors filled with representatives from countless species. Among those who worked on the Nexus was Lyra Ward, the great-granddaughter of Commander Elena Ward. Lyra had grown up hearing stories of her ancestors' courage and resilience, her actions a source of inspiration for generations. Now, as a diplomat for the Accord, Lyra carried forward the legacy of her family, her work guided by the principles of unity and understanding. One day, as she walked through the Nexus's Hall of Remembrance, Lyra paused before a holographic display of Elena and Krythak. The images flickered softly, their expressions captured in a moment of determination and hope. Beneath the display was an inscription. In the face of darkness, they chose the light. Lyra reached out to touch the display, her fingers brushing against the holographic surface. "I hope we're making you proud," she whispered. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a young Zorathian ambassador. The ambassador, tall and graceful, approached with a warm smile. "Ambassador Ward," she said, "the council meeting is about to begin." Lyra nodded, her gaze lingering on the display for a moment longer. "Thank you, Ambassador Rivik," she said. "Let's not keep them waiting." As they walked together toward the council chamber, Lyra felt a sense of purpose that had been with her since childhood. The road ahead was not without challenges. There were still divisions to overcome, conflicts to resolve, but the foundation was strong, and the lessons of the past were etched into the very fabric of their efforts. Back on Earth, the garden that Krythak had once visited had grown into a sprawling sanctuary. Families came to walk its paths, their children playing beneath the shade of trees that had been planted by their ancestors. At the garden's center, the monument stood tall, its presence a silent guardian of the peace it represented. One evening, an elderly human woman and a Zorathian elder sat together on a bench near the monument. They were old friends, their lives intertwined by the events that had shaped their worlds. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the garden in hues of gold and amber, they shared a moment of quiet reflection. "Do you ever think about the war?" the woman asked, her voice soft. The Zorathian elder nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I do," he said, "not with anger or regret, but with gratitude. It was a terrible time, but it taught us who we could be. It gave us the chance to build something greater." The woman smiled, her gaze fixed on the monument. "It's strange," she said, "how something so destructive could lead to something so beautiful." The elder placed a clawed hand over hers, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. "That is the nature of life," he said, "to grow even in the face of adversity." As the stars emerged in the sky, their light seemed to dance over the garden, a reminder of the journey that had brought them to this moment. It was a journey marked by loss and struggle, but also by hope and resilience. A journey that had proven, beyond any doubt, that even in the darkest of times, humanity, and all those who chose to stand with it, could rise to meet the challenge. Far away, the Stellar Nexus continued its mission, its lights a beacon in the vast expanse of space. And in the hearts of those who walked its halls, the legacy of Earth and the Dominion burned brightly, a reminder that the dust of the past could give rise to the stars of the future. The story of Krythak and Elena, of humans and Zorathians, became more than history. It became a guide, a promise, and a testament to the power of unity. And as the generations that followed carried their legacy forward, the galaxy was forever changed by the choice to see not an enemy, but an ally. As the inscription on the monument proclaimed, "In the dust, we found our strength. In each other, we found our future. As the decades turned to centuries, the alliance between humans and Zorathians evolved into a cornerstone of galactic stability. Their shared history became a symbol of reconciliation, a story told in classrooms and theaters across the galaxy. It was a tale of war and loss, but also of resilience, hope, and the transformative power of understanding. The stellar nexus, once an ambitious experiment, had grown into a sprawling metropolis in space. Its corridors bustled with activity, a tapestry of species and cultures united by a common purpose. At its heart was the Unity Forum, a grand chamber where leaders and diplomats gathered to discuss the future of the galaxy. One of the most significant moments in the Nexus's history came when it hosted the inaugural Unity Summit. Delegates from across the stars arrived in droves, their ships docking at the station's vast ports. The summit was a celebration of progress, a testament to what could be achieved when old wounds were healed and new partnerships forged. Lyra Ward, now a seasoned diplomat and one of the driving forces behind the summit, stood on the stage of the Unity Forum. The chamber was filled with representatives from countless worlds, their eyes fixed on her as she prepared to speak. Honored delegates, Lyra began, her voice steady and clear. We stand here today as living proof that unity is not just an ideal, it is a reality built on the foundations laid by those who came before us, who dared to choose cooperation over conflict, understanding over fear. Her gaze swept across the room, her words carrying the weight of history. The journey has not been easy, she continued, but it is a journey worth taking. Because in choosing unity, we ensure a future not just for ourselves, but for generations yet to come. The chamber erupted into applause, the sound a thunderous affirmation of the path they had chosen. Lyra stepped back from the podium, her heart swelling with pride. She thought of her great-grandmother, of Krythak, and of all those who had fought to make this moment possible. Their legacy was alive in every voice that joined the applause, in every handshake that bridged a divide. On Earth, the garden where Krythak and Elena had once reflected continued to thrive. It had become a place of pilgrimage, visited by those seeking inspiration and solace. The trees, now towering giants, stood as silent witnesses to the passage of time, their roots intertwined in a living symbol of unity. One visitor to the garden was a young historian named Terran, whose passion for uncovering the truths of the past had brought him to this sacred place. He walked the paths in quiet contemplation, his mind filled with the stories he had studied. When Terran reached the monument at the garden center, he paused. The sculpture of Elena and Krythak, their hands clasped in solidarity, seemed almost alive in the golden light of the setting sun. The inscription below it caught his eye. In the dust, we found our strength. In each other, we found our future. Terran reached out to touch the inscription, his fingers tracing the words. They were remarkable, he murmured, his voice filled with awe. A voice behind him startled him from his thoughts. They were more than remarkable, said an elderly man who had been sitting on a nearby bench. They were human and Zorathian, and that's what made them extraordinary. Terran turned to face the man, his curiosity piqued. Did you know them? He asked. The man smiled, his expression wistful. Not personally, he said, but my family was there. They fought in the resistance, stood alongside Krythak soldiers when the truce was formed. Their stories are what brought me here. Terran nodded, the weight of the history around them settling in his chest. Do you think we've lived up to their legacy? He asked. The man considered the question, his gaze fixed on the monument. I think we're trying, he said, and as long as we keep trying, as long as we choose unity over division, we'll honor what they stood for. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the garden in shades of amber and gold, Terran felt a sense of peace. The journey of Elena and Krythak, of Earth and the Dominion, was far from over. It was a story that continued to unfold, written by every hand that reached across a divide, every voice that chose dialogue over conflict. And somewhere, in the vast expanse of the galaxy, the light of their legacy burned brightly, a beacon for all who sought to find their way in the dark. It was a reminder that even in the face of insurmountable odds, humanity, and all those who walked beside it, could rise. As the stars emerged in the night sky, their light seemed to carry a message across the cosmos. In unity, we rise. In hope, we endure. And in understanding, we find our future. The galaxy remembered. From the ashes of war, songs were written and tales were spun, capturing the essence of a moment that defined an era. The Accord became a blueprint for peace, studied by worlds that had never known harmony. Delegations from distant planets visited Earth and Zorathian worlds, eager to learn from the species that had turned conflict into cooperation. On the 100th anniversary of the truce, the Accord held a grand celebration at the stellar nexus. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to commemorate the milestone, their presence a testament to the ripple effect effects of one small planet's resilience. The Nexus's central plaza was transformed into a gallery of history, its walls adorned with holographic displays of pivotal moments. One display drew particular attention, a reenactment of the first meeting between Elena and Krythak. The holograms captured every detail, from the tension in their postures to the cautious hope in their voices. Children watched with wide eyes, their imaginations alight with the bravery and resolve of those who had come before them. At the heart of the plaza stood a new monument, a towering structure that seemed to defy gravity. Its design was a collaboration of human and Zorathian artistry, a swirling helix of light and metal that symbolized the intertwining of their destinies. At its base were inscribed the words that had come to define their shared journey. Through struggle, we found strength. Through understanding, we found each other. Among the attendees was an elderly Lyra Ward, her presence a living bridge between past and present. Though her hair was silver and her steps slower, her spirit remained as vibrant as ever. She was approached by a young Zorathian diplomat who bowed respectfully before her. "Ambassador Ward," the diplomat said, his voice filled with reverence. "It is an honor to meet you. Your work has inspired generations." Lyra smiled, her eyes twinkling. "The honor is mine," she said, "but the credit belongs to those who paved the way. I've simply carried their torch." The diplomat gestured to the monument. "Do you think they would be proud?" he asked. Lyra turned to gaze at the monument, her expression thoughtful. "I think they would be," she said, "not because we've achieved perfection, but because we've never stopped striving for it. That's the legacy they left us, to keep reaching, even when it seems impossible." The celebration continued late into the night, a symphony of voices and lights filling the Nexus. Stories were shared, songs sung, and connections forged. And as the festivities unfolded, the stars beyond the station seemed to shimmer with a brilliance that mirrored the hope within. Back on Earth, the garden that had witnessed so much history was alive with visitors. Families strolled its paths, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. At the garden's center, the original monument stood unchanged, its presence a quiet anchor in a world that had transformed around it. A young girl with curly hair and a curious mind stood before the monument, her small hand reaching out to trace the figures etched in stone. Her father knelt beside her, his voice gentle as he explained the story of Elena and Krythak. "They were brave," he said, "but more than that, they were wise. They saw that the only way forward was together." The girl tilted her head, her eyes wide with wonder. "Do you think I could be brave like them?" she asked. Her father smiled, his hand resting on her shoulder. "I know you can," he said, "because being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing what's right, even when it's hard." As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, the girl looked up at the monument one last time. In its stillness, she felt the weight of its history, the power of the choices that had shaped her world. And in that moment, she made a silent promise to honor the legacy of those who had come before her and to carry their light into the future. Far beyond Earth, the stellar Nexus's lights burned brightly, a beacon in the vastness of space. And in the hearts of all who walked its halls, the story of humanity and the Zorathians endured, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the greatest victories were not won through might but through understanding. As the stars stretched endlessly across the sky, their light seemed to whisper a message to all who gazed upon them. In the dust of our struggles, we found the seeds of hope, and in each other we found the strength to grow.